Hey everyone, this is going to be the final chapter, the fifth and final chapter in terms of anything and everything that I would like to say in its seed form is going to be found in these 5 chapters. In this final chapter, I'm going to elaborate a little bit more about what I talked about in chapter 4 in terms of organization. I think that I can be a little bit more clear there. I'm going to talk about why do I think that this is some sort of solution, and like what, based on everything that I said in the prologue about gun violence or community woes, why do I think that this is a solution that can begin to help? I'll talk about that, and then I'll talk about why do I bring the Bible's God into it. That's what's happening now. Final chapter. Let's go.
I represent for the West Coast, uptown and back down, and everybody scattered with improper grammar. I represent for the West Coast, uptown and back down, and everybody scattered with improper grammar.
Thank you, everybody who has been traveling with me, journeying with me, listening to some of the things that I have to say. I want to talk a little bit about what I said in chapter 4, particularly because I have an aunt who's in church ministry. I have people who have started churches. And I don't want to make it seem that I'm against organization. I love organizing. In fact, what I said in chapter 4 was this, that the organizational structure that we create to have people gather and the organizational systems that we've created to allow charity to happen can often be misconstrued. And the point I was trying to highlight was about it's misconstrued in this way. When we say that that's kingdom, I'm talking from a perspective of a congregant, right? And some of the folk that I know who I speak with, although it's a small sample size, I'm just giving my perspective on things that I feel when I hear it. When I hear someone say, and usually it's in the African American community and other places somewhat, where we say, come and give to the kingdom. And giving to the kingdom in that sense is talking about the work that they're doing in ministry. I'm okay with organizing. My aunt has a church, but other people have churches. The only thing that I'm trying to point out is a distinction in language, not the idea of the organizing faction itself. Organizing is a great thing that human beings has done so we can understand how to be a little bit more efficient with our time and the things that we actually do have. Fine. What I'm saying is when we attach something to it like kingdom, I think it waters down what the reign of God really is. And an example of that in the Old Testament would be, think about how the children of Israel thought about their temple. There's no way that a foreign army can come and take this, because this is where God stays. But we also hear things in the scripture where I didn't think the children of Israel fully took to bear in their mind, where God says, can you build a place for me to be? Come on. And he showed that the temple isn't as uniquely indestructible as you think it is. Because God reigns, period. Right? He reigns, period. It's not he reigns in this organizational structure. He reigns. And that's the point that I'm making. Oftentimes when I hear give to the kingdom, it seems like it's some sort of demarcation where it's saying, okay, that's kingdom work, but what I do over here, maybe not. I don't know. It could be. And that's the only thing that I'm saying. And it's the reason I used in the last chapter the story of King Nebuchadnezzar to prove it, because God used Nebuchadnezzar to bring his people into captivity. Why? And some of those people felt like, oh, who's going to come and actually take us into captivity and actually capture Jerusalem? This is where God stays, right? This is where he reigns from. You have a great system, but he reigns, period. And that's the exact point that he made with Nebuchadnezzar. Hey, you need to know that I reign. This is God speaking. God is saying, Nebuchadnezzar, you got to know that I reign in human affairs, period. Period. And that's the only point that I'm making, because can you really give to the reign of God? I know we say, oh, come and give to the kingdom, but that you're talking about the reign of God. Can you get, here's a different way to say it. If we don't give, right? If people just decide, okay, I'm not giving, does God reign less? And I think that's an important distinction. And that's all I was making. I wasn't against the organization or organizational structures. Sorry, Auntie. Sorry, my friends who actually have organizations. I'm not against the structure. What I'm against is trying to take the language of kingdom and placing it solely on that without realizing that it can come off to people in the congregant as you're saying, that's kingdom. And your interaction with me isn't. Or God doesn't reign over you and over me, and that space in between where we're interacting. And He does, and we know that. That's it. I don't want to keep saying it over and over. Hopefully that made sense. The point is about language and really pointing out what the kingdom is, because we are supposed to. There's a gospel of the kingdom of God. What is it? Why is it good news about the reign of God? What is that about? And that's the message that ought to go out within uh, churches. What's the good news of that? And I don't think that anyone is inaccurate in saying, "Oh, this is ministry work." But when we use words like kingdom, I think it dilutes the potency of the term reign, reign, and that He reigns over you and I and the space in between. That's it. So in terms of the solution that I claim that I think I have based on what you heard in the prologue, where I was talking about my family dealing with gun violence and other community woes that you would see within a space where people are being violent with each other. I don't have a new solution for the issue. And here's what I mean. We all believe that the solution is self-awareness and interpersonal relationships or interpersonal communication within relationships. And I think we do a lot. And when I say we, I mean our nation, our people, our organizations. We do a lot in attempting to have people understand who they are. And I believe the same thing. I think the solutions are always going to be that self-awareness and finding a way to be or have interpersonal communication and the building of relationships. Here's where I come and I'm saying, here's what I'm offering. I believe that while self-awareness is absolutely critical, I'm not talking about cultural identity. I'm not talking about, hey, I am this, I'm African American, I'm rich, you name whatever title you could have. I'm not talking about those types of identity. I'm talking about our functional self-awareness in terms of our functional identity. So biopsychosocial, our functioning identity. And then when you get that down, then if you can understand that, you could understand a little bit more about interpersonal relationships, if you could understand how we actually function as beings. And that's where you see me talking about the core four sequence. I believe that's needed as part of that solution. And here's where I'm kind of positioning myself. I'm not here to give you predictive analysis of how you're going to be able to direct someone else's behavior. So I'm not here to tell you 80% of the time, if you do this, you're going to get this behavior. That's not what I'm doing. What I want to do is really just promote what I would consider to be free will and people's self-agency. I think that that's important. But in terms of psychology, let me say exactly where I stand or where I see myself positioned in the broad scheme of things. If psychology were, if let's say this, right? If this were a house and psychology was represented by this house, and this is the entrance, um, I would say this, that the solution that I have would be the equivalent of the doormat going into the house. I'm not here jockeying within the house for position, for you to hear me tell you some sort of insight that's going to be predictive in nature, for you to understand how to get your behaviors out. But it's like the welcome mat in the front of the door. Am I saying that I'm the only welcome mat? No, I'm saying that I'm positioning what I have as one of those options for the welcome mat, to have people understand a little bit more about just the general education of psychology before you enter in and you hear all these different insights. What I believe is that the core four sequence is like a welcome mat for you to have a general, and I think it's a preventative measure in terms of general education of psychology. And I'm saying that whatever you hear within the world, within the house of psychology, any advice that they're going to give you about psychology and about your behavior is going to be meant to target one of those four. So I find that the core four sequence is that welcome mat. I'm a strategist for general education. And I do that through dialogue, education. I do it through conversation, because you're going to be, and we all are, we're going to be hard pressed to try and find young people, especially young people in the outskirts of what we would call to be society, where we have people called at risk to the benefit of our society. Those folk, you're going to be hard pressed, especially in today's age, to have those folk listen to anybody trying to tell them something. When we go and we talk with them, we tend to talk at them and tell them things. And wouldn't it be great for us to come in and have a conversation and lead them into a dialogue that gets them in the flow of their own mind and being able to think? And I think that that's what the core four sequence, or the strategy of the core four sequence, is able to do. And you can see that in, is that chapter one? At the end of chapter one, I gave a sneak peek into an exercise. I'll say, go ahead and check that out, and do that exercise. Go into, talk to some young people and do that exercise and see what happens. And taking that functional self-awareness, now you have a foundation to understand interpersonal relationships or interpersonal communication within relationships. Am I saying that using the core four sequence will make people more better communicators? More better? That don't even make sense. Better communicators? uh, Maybe. I'm not here to be predictive about what's going to happen, but here's what I know will come of it: that they will have to shoulder responsibility on themselves, because the core four sequence reveals that if you are going to do anything within this life, they are things that you can do for yourself. You have the responsibility and the agency to do so. I would say that idea, that can be something that everyone will agree on. I believe that. I believe that. And once that begins to get into community, that idea can actually become a cultural norm. And that cultural norm is going to begin to push and make communities potentially a little bit more healthier, psychologically speaking. Um, that's what I think the solution is. The solution for me is having a general educational strategy model that gives people a springboard into understanding themselves, understanding psychology, right? And having some sort of foundation for understanding interpersonal relationships or interpersonal communication within relationships. Uh, yeah, I think that's a part of a solution. I think the solution has been in our communities a long time, and I'm just here saying, hey, look at it like this. How about this? It's not the solution, but I think it can be a helpful part of the solution. All right, so I have this kind of solution. Why do I bring the Bible's God into this? Because I'm biased. I believe. And so some of my message is going to go specifically to Christians and how you can use this. Because if I believe that's overall, in a general way, that the call for sequence can be used within community, then it can be used, in my opinion, within what we understand about our beliefs. For the Christian person or the Christian leader, here's I'm gonna give you an example of how it can be used seamlessly within Bible stories for people are that are of age, depending on the person who's speaking. So I'm going to use Abraham's story. So let's. Uh, Here's my phone. Oh, here you go. I got a Bible. So there's an Abraham story that I'm going to use, and I'm going to use the call for sequence to do it or to show how it can be used. So there's a Bible story about Abraham when Abraham is told to have given up his wife. He did it a couple times because he was afraid. Let's see if I can find it. Where is it? I think it's Genesis. So the story that we're going to use is in Genesis chapter 20. In this story, God had just told Abraham in Genesis chapter 19, maybe, or 18, that, hey, you're going to have a son with your wife, Sarah, within a year. In a year's time, I'm going to come back and you're going to have a son. That's what the angels told him. So the angels leave and he begins traveling and he bumps into a king, King Abimelech. And because he was afraid of the king, he was afraid that someone's going to come take his wife from him because she was beautiful and kill him. He told her, hey, tell them that you're my sister so that I won't be killed. And so she did, and they took her to be, King Abimelech took her to be his wife or one of his wives. I'm not going to go deep into the story. I just want to point out how I would use the core four sequence to talk about the story. Here's how I would use the core four sequence to explain a little bit about psychology within this chapter. So we be talking about Abraham is journeying. What does he see? What is his attention on? He sees a king, right? And what happens with him? He gets fearful. That's mile two. Mile two. What skill does he use? All right, persuasion. But what is he thinking? He's saying, if I go here, this king may see my wife, like her, and then kill me. And so you see this cycle happening. And we know it's happening because when the king got in trouble with God and God did some stuff to get them out of it, when he asked Abraham, why did you do this? How did Abraham speak about it? He says, this is verse 11. He says, I thought, surely the fear of God is not in this place, and you will slay me for my wife's sake. So you see how when we speak, there are things that are already happening within us, but the only thing we know is what we're thinking. But this sequence is already happening. He thought that, right? Okay, they don't have the fear of God. And because of it, they may kill me. And do you see this? I see them, I'm fearful. But why am I fearful? Because I value my life. And what am I going to use to try to hold my life together? I'm going to use the skill of persuasion, right? And influence to tell my wife some of the thoughts that I have. You see what I'm saying? So I can go much deeper into that, but that's exactly how it will be used. It can be used that way because the core four sequence is that thing that's going to be present in every single situation that you're in. How well you manage that. And before I leave off of this, let's talk about the distinction between what we understand naturally and what we understand by faith. Because what's interesting is that God just told him that within a year, you're going to have a son with this woman. See, when Abraham gave her up, he didn't just give up his wife and then he's going to get her back. No, he gave her up, potentially forever. God is the one who had to try to get her back. But how can you give her up when there was a word on her life? Right? There's a word saying that your seed is going to come from her, but you gave her up because of what you saw in the natural. What was he paying attention to? Where was his mile one? He's looking at the natural thing. Now, and this is the struggle with faith, right? You're asking us to believe something that we can't see. Right? Abraham can see the king. He can see their culture. He can see their norms. He knows what those things are. But there's a word that says, you're going to have a kid with this lady. You can't see that. What do you hold on to? What has the most effect on you? All right. And see where that conversation can go. Now, I can go into that conversation. Right now, I'm not, but I'm just giving you an example of how I would use the code for sequence, or how anyone can use the code for sequence to be able to explain certain scriptural passages. So while giving understandings of the faith and understandings of how to navigate our understandings of the faith, we can also simultaneously teach them the structure of psychology within our own lives. Anyway, that's all I wanted to share. Put this back up here. I'm being the final chapter. Man, thank you for rocking with me. I'm gonna figure out what I'm gonna do moving forward with this, but I think I have an idea. But until then, Virgin Islands. Virgin Islands. I got places to go. So, man, God bless. Establish your journey. I went rap to get that, no list smack, I'm humble. I hit last like 6 packs, that's big facts, so crumble. Stumble off the block, tell the time, but no snitching. Rim spinning, hug the corner, love the hustle and vision. Consistent like arm steady, aiming a bomb heavy, creep slow, let them know the eco, the calm Chevy. We anti with the levies, got the wave splash, taking change cash, get the bag first.